Today on ENthinkment Circle, we're going to have a conversation with Gerri McCulloh, and she's going to talk to us about acoustics and vital materialism and material discursive. And without any further ado, Gerri McCulloh. Okay, today we have the privilege on ENthinkment Circle to look at the amazing work of Gerri McCulloh. I had the honor to be on her dissertation committee, and I've been going back through the work, her writing. I find it amazing. And we're going to start with a few words and get deep about them. I'll bring up the slides in just a sec. But one of the words is Chora, C-H-O-R-A. At least that's one kind of spelling of it. And Gerri defines it, Chora, as a logic that is nonlinear with generative entanglements. And I think that will kick us off. So let me bring up the slides and we'll run through a few of these things. Okay, so I think that'll work. All right, you should be able to see a slide now that says, Gerri McCulloh, what is Chora? All right, and let me just show you the slide where I took a quote from her dissertation. And the dissertation, by the way, is titled Toward an Acoustic Rhetorical, Vital Materialism's Diffractions, 2015, Gerri Elsie McCulloh. All right, and let's dive in a little deeper. Gerri McCulloh says, just to give you a kind of a general theme of the dissertation, like Pythagoras, I believe the entire universe is acoustically energized, and therefore acoustics and soundscapes deserve attention as effects performed from vital matter. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. So, Gerri, do you want to comment or take questions, or what do you want to do?
Does anybody have a question about it?
Could you define vital matter?
Okay, so that's living matter. Okay, vitality, living matter. And I think it goes a little bit beyond what Jane Bennett did. Although she gave us the first sort of inroads, and then Karen Barat. Chora is actually sort of the engine, if you will, that marks and is marked, right? It's life, it's living. Chora is a very common, ubiquitous word in the Greek. It means place, right? In some instances, but it's also understood in its higher sort of ideals that, and ideals is actually the wrong word to use there. But Chora is also understood as the experimental apparatuses, as Karen Barat and Niels Bohr said, that experimental apparatus that both marks and is marked.
Okay.
Everything going through it, right? So the acousticness is, yes, that's an effect of the living matter.
Okay. Well, beautiful. Now, I put an acoustic guitar here. The next slide.
I don't know whether I'm helping or not. So.
Oh yeah, very much so. Chora and acoustics, diffractions of vital matter. So a little bit deeper. In the final section, acoustic insights of Chora, I return to my research problem to elucidate various disciplines listening to living Gaia, the earth in her becoming through acoustics and sounds, the diffractions of vital matter. I like that phrasing. I think what we might want to do is define diffractions a little bit.
Do you want me to go for it, or
Oh,
do you
yes,
want to do
please.
Well, I'm not not like the total expert on this, but diffraction is okay, think of a pond. When you throw a rock into the pond, right, it begins a series of waves, and they're underneath, there are undertones there, and then there are superpositions which we actually are able to image at that point. We get to see those waves, right? Those are superpositions. So have I gone too far?
No, no, not at all. The
Okay.
superpositions are they coming through in the sound vibrations? Is that, or
Sure. I mean,
they
we've
allow the
discussed,
sound vibrations, something like that?
yeah, I mean, we've discussed this before, that human beings, it was George Steiner that really got into the capacity and the fact that human beings probably would not be bipedal, right, if it were not for language and languaging. And this is Myra J. Hurd too. So, so when we our bodies were okay, so we only hear a certain amount of sound, right? But sound is very invasive. So everything that is making sound around us, that vital material, those acoustic fields, right? It's actually entering our bodies. This is how incredibly important our environments are. Because if our environments are dissonant, whether it's a work environment, a love environment, a relationship environment, all of these environments, it's critical that those sounds give us nourishment and harmony and healing
Hmm.
rather than the dissonance. So,
Okay.
am I making sense about diffraction?
Oh,
Diffraction,
yeah.
yes, are those waves from lively matter.
Okay. So Donna Haraway makes the statement that sometimes she'll go out in the morning with her dogs and she'll listen to the sound of the leaves, the birds, the air on her face, the wind in her ears. You know what I mean? And
Yes,
this acoustical surround will bring up her mood, will
yes.
enliven her. Does that make
I
sense?
call them the acoustic fields, right?
Hmm.
Because when I researched Pythagoras, that is what he didn't say those words, but that was what he was talking about. The entire universe, including the songs of the planets that he said the planets sing, right? The first to say that. He had a whole philosophy around sound, including hospitals that healed people with harmonics, right? Harmonics was at the very root of his hospitals, and nourishment and the rest, right? So when I looked at that, it was acoustic fields that I began looking at, and that's where Barat fine-tuned me. So did Donna Haraway, so did Myra J. Hurd.
Okay. And by the way, you have excellent summaries of each of their works in the beginning of your dissertation.
Oh, thank
Sabine,
you.
do you want to say something? Go off mute.
Two questions. Gerri, my question is, so does acoustic energy enter our bodies even if our ears can't hear them?
Yes. Yes, it does. We live in acoustic fields, right? And those acoustic fields are forever. Our homes are making sounds. The trees are making sounds. The soil is making sounds. We may not be able to hear that, but we are in fact being entered by those sounds. You cannot stop sound. It is invasive. But because we also are making sound, hopefully we can tune it to the point where it's harmonic, so that we harmonize with it. Does that make some sense?
I mean, it does make sense. And I also would like to point out, right, the effects that music has on us, right, in
Absolutely.
general. I mean, and
Mhm.
even on animals, right, from what I've read someplace, and I don't remember the source, right, that even animals are affected by this. And my second question is, we are surrounded by sound and sound, and I like the concept of acoustic fields, Gerri. I really like that.
Thank you.
How does that interact though with, the visuals? Because, we're getting everything at the same time. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, I think I do in this particular chapter. It's pretty clear that words themselves, as they emerge from this substrate of sound, right, are both the image. Okay, so that's clearly understood in language, that is imaged. That's one of the carriers, the travelers that help move it along, right? For me, when I think about Chora, and I want to try to wrap my head around doing something like this, we are never going to hear the universe's entire chorus, right? Not in my lifetime, I won't, right? So where I attempt to fit is to hear the chorus that I can hear, that I've been gifted, right? And to attune myself to that.
So I have a question. It's pretty much piggybacking Sabine's question.
Okay.
If there is this universally feelable acoustic feels and all of this, the visual enters it, I'm sure, because we attach a meaning to a visual with the help of sound, of acoustics. But what about the other senses like touch and smell? Do they entangle with each other, or how is that viewed, people who studied it?
Well, I do think that Karen Barat gives us that, right? Where those entanglements are there, right?
Yeah.
I obviously I had to focus just in the area that
Oh, yeah.
that I had some expertise in, but the entanglements are very real, right? And there's some stuff in this chapter, David, that I hope that we can talk about later.
Yeah, I got more coming.
Oh, that image, that sort of language, that the initial subset, or the initial sets that move it along, part of that is image and part of it is the aurality, the sound itself.
Okay.
So let's, Betty,
Okay,
I'm
thanks.
sorry, but
Yeah.
I could only do sound because that's
No.
where I
Yeah,
was.
this today is
Gerri,
just about sound. Yeah.
a thesis is meant to give yourself space to keep going in an area that was calling to you. The rest of it would have been noise. I mean,
Right.
literally
And that's such
interfering
a
with
great, thank you for saying that, Betty. That's such an
That's how I feel.
incredible insight, because so much of what we have to do right now and the work that we have to do, right, with people giving disinformation, tonally dissonant, right? What we have to learn to do is treat that as noise and set it aside so that we can actually hear the harmonies. And that's what we need to build on. I just love that you said that, Betty. You always have such great insights.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. You know, I looked a lot into semiotics with Charles Saunders Peirce, and he was often very specific about the fact that you have the object and the sign and the representum and the thing being represented.
Right.
And it wasn't always a sign, not always a word. It could be something else.
Exactly.
So I can see how you were able to go pretty far into a kind of sign that even he neglected. He did not do much with acoustics.
You know, I got a little bit into him, and what's interesting is that Worf, who, with semiotics, right? Worf said, look, these cryptotypes are there, right? This is like musical underpinnings, right? They're there. And they're and he claimed they were within the grammars of various languages, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's so or not, but I'm working with a guy right now who's really taken phonemes to a new level. And I believe he's onto the cryptotypes, right? His name is Stephen Douglas. And I believe that he's starting to crack that open, which I could never do, right?
Yeah.
I was able to give the treatment where I went into Charles Saunders Peirce, Saussure. I went into you know, but I wound up with that vibrant materialism, that acoustic fields that we live in, and you know, how do we make that healing, right? And that has to do with, okay, so imagery is one thing, but it's not, it's okay, so even someone not saying a word can have a non-vocal verbal, right? Here's one, right? Or like that's another, right?
Yeah.
Or this, right? So there's these different aspects, if you will, to language that that are interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. With your permission, I'll go to another slide.
Yeah, please, David. I'm
Move
getting myself
along.
in trouble here, aren't I?
Okay, this next slide is for the engineers in the audience. So it's kind of a summary of where we're at. Now, what is Chora? Chora is kind of the English spelling, as I understand it, but Khora is the Greek spelling. And so you often see the Greek. So I wanted to just put that out there in case people get confused by seeing two different words. So first part, refocus on energetic and vibrant matter through the somewhat obscure Greek concept of the chora. Plato argued chora as Pythagorean. Materially generative place where vital material is energized from a feminist materialist perspective. So it's just kind of summarizing where I think we are. So does that seem okay? We'll go on.
Yeah, I mean, he that's Timaeus is a very interesting work because Plato actually it's well known that he forged Timaeus of Locre's signature, right? And the other thing that he did is he took from Pythagorean texts, we believe, and he threw out parts of them. In fact, he was well known for burning books, he
Right.
and Aristotle both. And so he actually went into Italy, which was you know, Pythagorean communities, and went all over Greece and collected Pythagorean books and burned them, right? And so the Timaeus, we believe, is what's pretty interesting here is what's not written. And that's about the Medusans themselves and their creatrix and their ideas about the creatrix, right?
Okay.
That was then replaced with patriarchy as Plato and Aristotle saw it. Okay. And this puts spirituality on the outside, which is a bunch of crap.
I agree. I'm going to get to Medusa a little bit later, so I don't want to spoil that. But I'm just trying to build it up a little building block at a time. So in this slide that we're going to see, you see a little bit different kind of image for acoustic dynamics of chora acoustics. And as you say, likewise from the chora's dunamis, dynamics,
It's dunamis, yeah.
Dunamis, all matter gains acoustic voice or energetic frequency vibrations. Second sentence, the relations diffract tones, whether tones of discourse, tones of practice, or tones of becoming.
Yes.
from humanism's and representationalism's denatured or agentially cut logics, including those from Platonic ideals, discursive material diffractions also produce monstrous exclusionary chimeras.
Right.
So this is very exciting, but it
This
has
is
some
cautionary.
twists and turns in it because now we're dealing with dynamics, the acoustic voice, the frequency vibrations, so it's kind of there, vibratory matter. Then we go to tones. So the second sentence is about tones,
Right.
tones of discourse, but also tones of practice. And I'm not sure if that's just verbal practice or it's all kinds of practice.
Nonverbal as well, you know.
And then the tones of becoming, that just bridges into previous sessions we've done on Upward North Whitehead and the process of becoming. But tones of becoming adds another layer or level. And then we got the third one, that this is not all good stuff. This could turn this chimeras, or whatever you call them, exclusionary.
The
So,
chimeras. And that's,
chimeras.
yeah, or chimera, I don't know how it's
I
pronounced,
don't
frankly,
either.
in ancient, you know. I mean, I'm doing chimera. That's fine.
Okay,
with
Betty
me.
will know.
The word in French is chimere, so I say chimeras, not knowing anything
Yeah,
better.
that's my
Right.
French
And I've heard
background.
that before, Betty. No, and maybe it is chimera,
Mm,
for so many reasons. So
yeah.
But what do you think about this, the complexity here that's going on in the Chora acoustics, I'll call it the dynamics. So.
anybody? I mean, do you want me to speak to some of this? The chimeras are the monstrosities that can be produced, right? And I do speak a little bit in this chapter and also before about phase out problems and dissonance, right? I've gotten into that in this dissertation on sound. The chimeras, right, are those who have been oppressed, sometimes completely written out, like the Medusans were in this, and Medusa was here. So they become a punctuation mark, if you will. So, and we've all probably experienced that. So, you know, I kind of fell in love with the semicolon, but I also really love the comma, right? How do we, instead of punctuating erasure, right? How do we make that into a comma and say, you know what? There's all kinds of other stuff that we're not thinking about. So let's let a lot of different voices come in but this is what I can think about right now.
Sure.
And make it a comma or a semicolon rather than a period or an exclamation point. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. You know, I just did some videos for Jim Seibel on the true storytelling. It did the Six Blind Men and the Elephant. You know, if you remember the story, I'm sure you all do. It's 3,000 years old. You know, Hindu, Buddhist, Jainism, etc. But what's interesting about it is each person has their agential cut logic, I would say. You know, where I feel this fan. Oh, I feel this rope. No, I feel this thick snake. No, I feel this tree. I feel this wall. So each of the six is already made the cut of what that is. They don't see the whole elephant. They're blind, right? But they made a cut, and they get fixated in there. They get stuck in there, and they're all men too. That's a point, Paul. They're all men. You know, the six blind men. These aren't three blind women and three blind men. It's six men. Anyway, so I just see this kind of problem in all organizations, education, classrooms, everywhere, families, right here, where our cut logics are going to be so different coming into a conversation or listening to each other, something like that. That's what I get. out of this. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I think you're onto it. I mean, okay, so if you take a step back, there are some organizations that consume the consumers. They consume the consumers. It's an act of cannibalism, right? Including on their own workers, right? Who gets erased? Who gets maimed? Who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak? These are all really big questions, right? And it creates the chimera. I'm going to go with that one, Betty. It creates the chimera that can be the monstrosities that eventually take that particular organization, that organism, down. And we can talk about contagions, we can talk about infections, we can talk about all of that kind of stuff, but it's usually stuff that they think is not worth looking at, right? And so the organization cuts it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can kill the organization if they do. So, we have, at some point, we have got to convince organizations and big corporations that we have to get back into a gifting economy.
Sure.
The excesses cannot just flow to the top. It has to gift to the planet. We have to get there because we don't have that much time left.
Well, I want to move into an example. We'll take Sabine's question and then we're going to move into an example from your dissertation. Go ahead, Sabina.
I think I would find an example really helpful. Thank you for that. And this is likely just me here, but can you talk a little bit about the phrase relations diffract tones?
Yeah.
And I can't get that somehow into my head.
Okay, so every relation, and I mean, you can think of a love relation, you can think of an academic relation. I mean, David and I have a very deep and rich history, which hasn't always been great, right? But mostly it has been. And so we're very, very close friends. Does that make some sense?
Sure.
But each of those interactions, right, has created tone, a tonal portion of our relationship. Am I making some sense?
So is that then, if I hear you right, does that mean that the tone for each interaction is in that particular time?
Well, okay, so what we know about sound and harmonics, right, is they don't stop. They're like eternal. And so getting tone, right, and understanding tone is kind of a big deal because that is one way that we can gift one another, right? We can say something that has the appropriate tone, right? And that's kairotic. Tone is always multiple, always. It starts out at 3, it starts out at multiples. So, but we began a counting system and an accounting system with Plato and Aristotle, Plato with the monad and the dyad going with Aristotle. And I'm sorry, but that's what got us into modernity's problems and huge chimera, right? From predatory mercantilism to slavery to, I mean, some real chimera.
All right.
Am I making, so it's the relations, it's the relationships itself. I mean, I would do a word search. I mean, get this and do a word search if you're interested in that, because there's a lot that you're asking.
Right.
It's layered.
Yeah. And I think, I think you can have, no relationship is even, either. There are these ups and downs and, and we don't always, I think we don't always get, you mentioned the term appropriate tone, right?
Right.
I mean, and appropriate, who defines appropriate, right?
Well,
And
and that's, yeah, that becomes really interesting.
who
Really
define, I mean,
interesting.
what you might find appropriate, the person
Yes,
who is listening to us like,
Well,
well, wait a minute, what was that?
that's right. It's culturally, and so there, I write a little bit about that,
Mhm.
Okay.
particularly in
Yeah.
sections on kairos and the kairos and the akairotic. It becomes really interesting. But tone is really so very important because it's everywhere, and it's something that we can actually do.
Okay, I'll just
React
say, Sabine,
strongly
every
to it,
time you
too.
mention your husband David and you say the
Mhm.
name David, it's different than when you say David Bogie. When you say the word David, like David Trofimos, oh, David is back.
Yeah,
Oh, David is here, And I
it's
always
true,
marvel at that. And I
but
can
we
tell the whole
respond.
relationship climate from that tone.
It's true. I mean, I think it's true, and we react very strongly to that, right? I mean, really
Yes.
strongly.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's look
Yes,
at an
it does
example.
something. It does
Okay,
something to the
go ahead.
words that we're speaking. It places them in a harmonic relationship, right, or a tonal relationship. It just and as Karen Barat says, it's not like anything can happen. There are contingencies, right, from material histories. Anyway, okay.
Okay, well, cool. Thank you, Gerri.
Good
All right,
stuff.
we're going to go to the example from Gerri's marvelous dissertation and work that I hope will be published as a book soon. And
Really? Oh, wow.
okay, so here we have it. The big horn medicine wheel is a topic
Yes.
Gerri has written about elsewhere. I'll just
Mhm.
read the little print. The discursive material conflict, when I translate sometimes conflict that
I can't even see it.
underscored Justice Holloway's decision began in 1988 when the U.S. Forest Service, USFS, planned to develop the site for tourism. Now, this is monstrosity here, so just clue you in. Metal fence erected around the medicine wheel to discourage vandalism in 1991 that was later replaced with a wooden rope fence 1996-1997 to reflect Native American cultural beliefs against metals in ceremonial sites. So now, Gerri, if you could bring us into the acoustic aspect of that, and I'll just start. When I go into a sacred place, the sounds are different that I hear. It's like I go through a curtain and the birds sound different, the wind sound, I don't know how it is for you. I'm going to ask you how it is for you because I know you go here to the medicine wheel.
I do. I mean, actually, I grew up nearby. I mean, we had our sheep about a mile away, mile and a half away. And so, the berries on the foot of the mountain were, for us to pick. There used to be trails going up that the pika had made and that others had made, right? And they crisscrossed themselves. And now there's the pika were killed off by a road. So the acoustics immediately changed when that road came in. The dust and the heat and the noise killed off the pika, and they only have about a half a mile range, and they usually only have one offspring per season, right? And so it just decimated the pika, and the cascading activation, if you will, for you engineers, happened when the eagles who nested along the cliffs and raised their babies there, right? They were golden eagles. They no longer had the pika, and so they left. And now it's these huge ravens that are there. So the acoustic qualities of this particular site have changed depending on what what we did with it, right? What people did with it. It's still an amazing place to go. I'm kind of veering off. So
No,
ask me.
it's wonderful because what you're talking about and what I'm hearing is a methodology for going to a sacred place and tuning into the acoustics historically, socially, historically from the indigenous, historically from these agencies that are taking
Right.
control. And you're showing the dynamic. I hear you speaking the dynamic transformations happening that
Right.
most of us would not have a clue about if we didn't
Right. I
understand
mean,
what
you
you're
wouldn't
doing.
unless you grew up there. You wouldn't unless you saw it come in, right? You wouldn't unless you fought, with the HPP that they finally adopted. It actually saved 18,000 acres, right? A little over, like, I think 2.5 square miles, right? The medicine wheel. It's okay. So just to explain to you, the medicine wheel is the exact same proportions as Stonehenge. Exactly. Okay. It has 28 spokes, which is a feminine number, right? Lunar number. Right. Oh, thank you, David. It has 6 cairns around, and the 7th cairn, this is kind of a big deal. That 7th cairn is in the middle. It's in the center. It's at the apex. It's at what we might think of as a 0 point, except there is no such thing as a 0 point. That is the Kairos point. That is the 7th motion of sound, right? When you have the scale, right, before it goes into the octave, right? And it gives you something brand new. And you begin to see the past, present, and future in different ways. It's a very powerful place. I really hope that you guys can make it there at some
Yeah,
point in your
thank you.
lives.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the illustration. Let me ask the audience, does this help this example? Does it help you get a little deeper appreciation for acoustic tone, for the chora, for the material semiotics of this, or not?
It helps us approach a part of what's going on. And I agree with Sabine, and examples are always better. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm wondering if there isn't more access for some people than others. For Gerri, for example, when she can feel the acoustics, is that given to everyone?
Yeah. Good, Gerri. What do you think?
Boy, I don't know. It took me a lifetime of work, Betty, and to get the little tiny glimpse that I'm getting, you know.
That's a good answer to my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go to another example here, and it's something that Gerri has talked to me about in the past.
I'll be right back.
I don't know, I'll explain it a little bit while you're away. The new vocabulary word is palimpsest. Palimpsest, it could be, all right? And it's Pythagorean thinking. And the palimpsest is defined, and I got this outside of the dissertation, as a piece of writing material on which the original writing has been effaced to make room for later writing, but which traces remain. So in the old, Greek, when they wrote on tablets, you would efface the tablet to write a new letter, like a lawyer's letter or whatever it was. And then you could still see some fragments of what was there before. So this process would apply to the bighorn medicine wheel because it's being effaced over time, but you can still see some of the fragments that were there historically coming through. Does that make sense? So this word Am I saying it correctly, Jerry? Palimpsest?
Yeah, palimpsest. And I think a really a good example for you guys might be that the original writing, they would take these wax rolls and they would inscribe the lettering, right? And then the ink, after inking it, they would roll it out, and then they would melt the wax down again. If they didn't melt it correctly, right, or enough, then there were marks from what went before. And that's what palimpsest is. It's the mark, the trace of what has gone before.
Okay.
And that's why Medusa's head on Athena's shield is a palimpsest.
We're
Right?
going to get to Medusa.
Oh, okay.
But what I want to ask you is, I want to make a point here that I think is very, very important. The word trace is part of the methodology of feminist semiotics.
Mhm.
Would you agree? And this is where I believe your methodology that you're putting forth here is somewhat different than the trace in Karen Barad, the trace in Donna Haraway, the trace in Jane Bennett, the trace in Ira J. Hurd. So you're doing a trace. They do a trace as well. The whole methodology of tracing is something I think most people don't have much of a clue about.
I'll have to think on that because yeah, I mean I know I do traces, but I also follow the marks that came before, the punctuation that came before, that sort of stuff, because too often in culturally people get erased. And so their voices are not necessarily accessible or as accessible. Bighorn Medicine Wheel, yes, does ask people to take a look at this in how we manage sacred sites or how we manage any site, really. What are we doing, right? Will a road kill off the pica that will eventually cascade activation, kill off make the eagles move? And then if so, what are the acoustics of the place that you're leaving, that you're supposedly managing? These are, I don't know. Am I making some sense?
Oh, absolutely. I was just out before this session doing a film at the pond, and there was
Right.
enough rain that the spadefoot toads were hatched,
Oh, cool.
the polywogs. Now, there's not enough water. There wasn't enough rain that they're going to be able to survive. So it's kind of tragic. But I have to know the kind of a cycle of the rain and how much water it takes in the pond for them to have a successful birthing and dig down in the next generation, et cetera. So, and this is a palimpsest. There's a tracing there of the roads that the state of New Mexico, the federal government is putting in, the gas company that's got a big tank out there, and people with their off-road vehicles. I just watch it year by year, month by month change, and it's kind of sickens my heart to see it. But what I'm saying to everybody is, if you have a place that you go to, like Jerry goes to Bighorn Medicine Wheel, you can watch it change over time. You can watch the impact of organizations and people and recreation and tourism and all the rest of it. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, you can trace those decisions, and those decisions are often governmental and or corporate, or both, right? And so you definitely trace some of those older decisions that have made the place what it is today, rather than perhaps the place, this is why there were 5 different tribes and farmers and ranchers like us who said, no, you will not make this a tourist site.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So,
Sure.
We knew what was coming.
Okay. All right. It's time for some new vocabulary. So
Oh no.
there's not too much here, but these are words easily rememberable. So the new word here is third kind.
Yes.
So the Pythagorean system and Chora, the third kind, Triton genius, I guess, of the Chora encouraged generative variation of the elements of the Pythagorean unlimited, which started with the essences of fire, air, water, and earth. 4 is the referent for the unlimited. 3, you will recall, is the reference in the Pythagorean system of limited and unlimited, understood as the limited. These also
Yeah, that's such a
echoes the
bulky,
three
that's
faces.
such a clunky statement. I wish I had written
Oh,
that
I love
differently,
it. I
but I
love it.
was
That's
so
why I pulled it
exhausted.
out. I'm in love with the statement. Don't interfere with my love. The 3 also echoes the 3 faces of the great goddess in
That's right.
matriarchal culture. So there's what I like about it is there's this reverence for the 3 and the 4 and the interplay of the 3 and the 4. And I had to do some work with this because I had to go back to the Pythagorean theorem. First, I thought it was a Pythagorean theorem, but it's not
No, it's
that.
not.
It's the third. It's the third
That's right.
that counts. You know what I mean? So that was
That's right.
part of my male learning curve. You know what I'm saying? So I admit to that. But so this third kind
Yes.
of the Chora, can you give us a little more? Can you amplify, expand, illustrate something?
Well, I mean, I think it's so difficult because we are, Western culture in particular, and I wish that this is where Usha could maybe give us some insight, right, and say it better than me. But Western culture has been so in love with the monad and the dyad, right? This bifurcation process, either or, that it's really difficult for us to see the thirding, right? Barat does a really great thirding. So does Donna Haraway. Yes, Myra J. Hurd is fabulous with the biosemiotics, and that came from Lynn Margulis, by the way. And she was at the Margulis Institute, right, for a year, and worked with microbes, right, at that institute. Lynn Margulis was Carl Sagan's one of his wives. So he's I think first or second. I don't know whether she was first, second, or third. I think second. So, very much the consciousness of the whole universe, these big picture kind of things as well. The thirding is really hard to grapple with, right? Because the one-eyed monster, right, that was created, as Donna Haraway would say, right, that Metatron, that God on the outside, right, took the place of the multiple three-faced, life-giving, gifting economy.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that Grace Ann writes about too, the gifting economy too, as well.
That's right.
So the thirding, though, I really like it. So if I understand what you're saying, particularly males are into dualities, splitting things out, or into monoisms and then dualities. But the thirding, kind of in the Charles Saunders Peirce way as well, is to try to kind of bring us out of the duality, bring us out of the duality into a thirdness, the third kind. And what you're saying, if I get it right, is Pythagorean was doing this way back when?
Yes.
500 BCE or something like that?
6th century BC.
Okay.
Yeah. So 5 something. So it was 6th century BC. Yeah.
Okay. So, wow. Okay. So everybody take a deep breath because that was a big concept. Thirding.
So
Yeah.
the thirding and the mathematics involved with what Pythagoras was doing, we might think of as like something that a supercomputer could now show us, right? But he was already doing it because it was well known in the culture that the numbers were alive, right? First of all, they were alive, right? But that thirding, that three of the limited, that beginning was always multiple.
Mhm.
The monad and the dyad were not even, that was a fool's journey. They could see where it would take you into, we're now living it, fascism, some of the consumers consumed. I mean, this is a diffractive pattern that started with Plato and Aristotle,
Oh, sure.
and Pythagoras really kind of knew that stuff.
Yes,
Do
repeat.
you
You
know
kind of
what?
He knew.
What fascinates me in what you're
Go
saying,
ahead.
Gerri,
Go ahead.
you're using the word thirding is not something I've heard before, but
Right.
in the case of Charles Saunders Peirce, he called it thirdness, and thirdness itself means a state that we have to accept. The big difference between Saussure and Peirce was that Saussure always put things in twos. Tree equals the word tree. And Peirce said, no, 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 no. We have interactivity going on. So what it
Right.
permits by adding the third is that there's a dynamic going on. If you're just two, there's a correspondence. It's static. And that's not the way the world works. But I'm learning more from what you're calling thirding. That's even
Well,
more.
and what you're saying is really interesting because from the time of Plato and Aristotle, then of course we began to imagine, and it was just imagination, it's a fiction, that there's a word-to-world correspondence, right? And that we have control over that, right? Then of course came the linguistic turn where we said, well, our words are power and it will change things. And it did, right? And it does, right? But the thirding is something that I'm trying to get into, and I don't know whether I've done a very good job. I'm hoping to figure this out. The thirding is about nourishment and health and gifting.
It was a great
Right.
job. Great job.
I'd like to read it because I feel like it's we're all missing this in our understanding of linguistics. Now, not everybody missed it. Pierre Bourdieu, who wrote about linguistic capital, he was actually pointing out that when you talk about language being powerful, what you're really saying is there's more going on than the strict meaning of the word. It's how we perceive a person according to probably even the tone, their ability to speak Oxfordian English. And Jean Marcos, what you feel about your English is what happens all over the world. People who are not necessarily the most clever in a group, but who happen to be native English speakers will be big mouthed. And the ones who might have something profound to say will say, oh, my English is not as good. It won't be appreciated or understood. And this linguistic capital is the fault of the native speaker completely because more is going on than the one-to-one correspondence. Yes.
Right.
So I'd love to read what you're writing, Gerri. Is it going to be in the form of a new book or a chapter or a paper?
I don't know. I think I want to talk to David a little bit about it, but I mean, you could certainly read what I've written so far. I mean, David
Okay.
could probably send that off to you and I mean, don't read the whole thing, just do word searches.
Okay.
I go into logos and logocentrism and the window pane and the linguistic turn. And it's finally with Chora that we get into the thirding, that gifting, like that
Mhm.
tonal stuff. Okay, so words themselves, words that we choose, right? Words
Mhm.
themselves have a tonal sort of resonance, and this is where Deborah might be able to help me with this. Um, and that's where cryptotypes are so fascinating to me with the work that Stephen Douglas is doing, because when you take a phoneme, right, you recognize that that has a tone that we either accept or reject, right? And there's various ones that he's gone through. And I think it's absolutely fascinating. And yet we're all stuck with the words. That's why David making up words is wonderful to me. I love it when he does that, right? But those words themselves didn't come from nowhere, right? They came from a substrate of other images and signs, and and a tonal relationship there. So it's just, I mean, Betty, when I really look at it, it's like overwhelming to me. It's just I'm just seeing a little tiny slice, and that overwhelms me.
Yeah.
I wish I had the knowledge, right? So
Well,
Okay,
you're
so
breaking it up into pieces. Yeah.
okay, so we're going to go back through the third kind with a different quote from Jerry's work. So
okay.
let's look at that now. Okay, so Chora, third kind. This third kind is a different kind of logic than idea or image, capable of leaving a trace on both ideas and image. Chora, like kairos, is nonlinear energy infusing matter, leaving a trace, mark, or linear energies. And then I chose this image of the nonlinear. So this is just a different way to look at, or different set of outtakes from Jerry's manuscript. But I'm interested in this notion that the third kind is a different kind of logic, a different kind of thinking, since we're at ENthinkment Circle, a little commercial for
Yeah.
ENthinkment Circle, and we're thinking deeply today, than an idea or image.
Right.
So am I correct that this acoustic tone is a third kind, or is there more to it or less to it?
It can be. I mean, it's and this is really difficult stuff. This goes into dissoi logoi, right? And that's a principle. Um, and it's probably way too much for me to get into right now, right? But the dissoi logoi actually is sort of the rhetorician's tool, if you will. It exists. I mean, they're utilizing it like a bricoleur. Um, and that brings along a symbiogenesis from either tension or complementarity that is already there within the thirding, right? It just
Okay.
brings it out, it amplifies. Am I making sense?
Oh
And
yeah,
that's a
that's
Kairos
very, very
situation
helpful.
too.
Very helpful. So
Okay.
it's already there, and the
Mhm.
tonality, if that's the entry point, amplifies, brings it out, but it
Sure,
has to be
sure.
there.
And you could enter it, I think, with Betty's suggestion, you could enter it with smell, with any sense
Oh yeah,
that
that's
that you want. Chora itself means place, and so in Greece and in Italy, I mean, it's like chora, 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 chora. It's even in our bodies, right? It's everywhere, right? But it's also
okay.
that which generates the life, and thankfully, it is everywhere.
hmm Okay, so a little preamble. This next set of slides um, looks at Quora from Wikipedia. Now, one of the nice
Uh-huh.
things, Jerry, about Wikipedia is you can go in there and just work with Ronnie on this because he's really, really good at it,
Okay.
going into Wikipedia, and you can make additions and counterpoints to what's there. So
Okay.
if you read this in horror, know that it's coming from a different place, okay? As
Okay.
are several slides coming up. So let's just take a look at this. Let me move this slide thing ahead. Okay. All right. You should see a slide that says Chora on it with an image from somebody's website. I checked it out on Wikipedia, and this person is not talking about Chora in the same way that you are, but it did say in semiotics. By the way, a definition of semiotics is signs, sign systems. Everything is signs around us. In semiotics, Chora is the space that gives a place for being. The term has been used in philosophy by Plato to designate a receptacle of space, a material stratum, or an interval. And I know, Gerri, you disagree a little bit with that statement, maybe a lot. So,
Well, no, I mean, I actually have a similar, I go back into the definitions as well, receptacle, all of that.
you had
The
place.
third, I want to go back quickly to the thirding, because the thirding is a variety of logics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's not just one logic opposed to something else. It's a variety of, it's multiple logics. And that's where dissoi logoi has to come in. But I don't necessarily disagree with how it's been translated. These are all translations
Okay.
of,
Then we're
and so you take what's there. I do disagree with the male population, including Derrida.
that's next.
Okay.
Let me show you this slide. But do you want to state your disagreement first, or do you want to see this slide?
Okay, so whenever you're talking about the void or the abyss, just know that you're screwed up and you're in the monad and the dyad. It's
Okay.
just not, it shouldn't happen. It's not good. It's not generative.
So here I'm going to contrast what Wikipedia says about Chora and Jacques Derrida and some of the things that Gerri McCulloh says, and I'll amplify a little bit too. All right. So in the Wikipedia, it says Jacques Derrida uses Chora to name a radical otherness that gives place for being. Characterizing Chora is described as a formless interval like a non-being in between which the forms were received from the intelligible realm where they were originally held and were copied, shaping into the transitory forms of the sensible realm. It gives space and has material overtones, a womb, a matrix, as examples. So now this is Wikipedia, okay? Now Gerri has her own take
Well,
on.
which I kind of like. I mean, I like the images that they're doing,
Okay.
It's only when they go into the void or abyss that I'm like, okay, wait a minute here.
Okay, because I noticed during the dissertation there was some Derrida saying this, and then wait a minute here and there. So
Yeah. When he
that's what I'm
went
trying
into
to
the
bring out.
abyss, I didn't care for that.
Now, Gerri McCulloh says Derrida notes Chora is something that cannot be represented. So I thought that was exciting to me.
It is.
And I'm wondering if, Derrida says there's nothing beyond outside the text, where I think Chora is outside the text.
Yeah. Well,
as a being outside of the text.
any textualist, including Umberto Eco, Derrida, Foucault. I mean, there's a bunch of textualists, right? And they're good. They're really good with what they work with, right? Having said that, it misses the materiality, right? At these real fine granular levels, that living matter. So it erases and it creates a chimera. Eventually, that's where that particular diffraction will go. It will create a chimera. So we got to get this. We got to start getting it right and paying attention again.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Oh, I think so too. Let me just make a note here before we do this next thing. Change the order a little bit. All right. Okay. And I'm staying with Wikipedia here. And
Okay.
this is something Wikipedia says about Julia Kristeva. As you know,
Oh,
Julia
wonderful.
Kristeva was
I read about it.
part of
Yeah.
the dissertation and is also our fellow Bakhtin that we like is very, very
Right.
interested in that. And so let me just show you this part. And again, the idea is maybe go onto Wikipedia and make a few adjustments. But it says Julia Kristeva,
Mhm.
her analysis of the difference between the semiotic and the symbolic realms is the emancipatory employment of semiotic activity as a way of evading the allegedly phallocentric character of symbolic activity, significant signification through language, which followed Jacques Lacan is regarded as an inherently limiting and oppressive form of praxis. So,
Mhm.
and I chose
Well,
male figures. That's my figure.
yeah, Julia Kristeva really does not believe that women have a voice, right? This is like she really, really points that out. I tend to disagree, okay, because there's lots of material out here to work with, right? But she makes that point to point out the terrible omissions and oppressions that have happened in patriarchy, right? And if you recall, Pythagoras he lived at a time when matriarchy and patriarchy were in transition. Now I need to make it really clear. Matriarchy is not the mirror opposite of patriarchy. It is a much different counting of time,
Okay.
much more complex. Does that? So I'll leave it there for now.
I was hoping you'd tell us how it's more complex for Paul and Jean and I.
Well, I mean, it begins with threes. It begins with threes in their accounts instead of ones and twos.
Okay, there you go. Good answer. Now, this next one will be the last part from Wikipedia. And right before we get to Medusa. So Medusa's coming up right after this. So um, let's see. Here we go. Okay. Um, and again, let me just make it clear that this is Wikipedia on the slide. Okay, very good. All right. Now, you didn't talk about Martin Heidegger in any big way or even little way in your dissertation. So
Well,
this is on
I
Wikipedia.
critiqued him.
I believe that. But Wikipedia just says Martin Heidegger and Chora is referring to a clearing in which being happens or takes place. So not much there. I like the image that I chose. I think those are dragonflies with very big eyes. So, and why don't we just switch right into Medusa? Medusa's laugh is something that Jerry writes about. And here it says, as a feminist materialist, I hear Medusa laughed uproariously. Nevertheless, what I have called Derrida's fabulous failure to architecturally render the Chora is instructive, perhaps precisely in its failure, since humanism's representationalism was ruptured in the failure.
Mhm.
Can you explain to us in the audience what is
Sure. I mean,
going
what
on
went
there?
before was Derrida and Eisner. He was a big architect, right? Got together and they were going to build a park, right? That was the Chora, right? And so they were going to translate the philosophy of Chora, which at that point in time, Derrida has a lot of different renderings, including the abyss and the void, right? Which is, I don't know if you can ever get anywhere if you really think that way, but whatever. He and this architect and series of architects actually tried to build the Chora to have it represented, and they failed.
Mhm.
He did get some stuff right with the lyres, the three lyres, right? The acoustic, like arena, right?
Mhm.
With the three different, and that's lyres, lyres, not liar, not as in deception,
Okay.
but the musical instrument, right?
The layers.
He got some stuff right. I mean, it's Chora L works is boy, sometimes I look at it, it's so deep, but I also look at it as a parody. David, you might be interested in it for that,
Yeah, I'm going to do some more research on it.
Yeah. I mean, even the name choral works is kind of instructive. Chora L, you can put that as choral works, right? So the choral, right? And I go into that a little bit later on in the work. Yeah, I think he does a brilliant job.
Yeah.
He's brilliant. But Kristeva, Haraway, the other material feminists recognize that he left out Medusa. He
Yeah.
left her out. And this patriarchy has been trying to get rid of Medusa since the days of matriarchy, right? In the Grecian area and Italy, right? She was a triple-faced goddess. She and that was her triple face, we believe. Now there are some that dispute this, but anyway, one of her faces was Neith, the goddess of night. There's been a lot done on Neith that I didn't do, and so I'm not going to go there. Athena, who was originally the
Athena,
goddess of
yeah.
love, became the goddess of betrayal in my world, right? And the creatrix herself, Medusa, right, who was named guardian or protectress, same thing as Zeus. That's what the male name, guardian, right? So in that, what was recognized with Medusa, this living triple goddess, right? When they cut her head off, she was still very powerful. She could turn things to stone, which is the material substrate of living matter.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So they weren't ever going to be able to get rid of Medusa. What they had to do was a racial rendition. Okay. Put her on Athena's shield with snakes instead of those wonderful African locks. Right? Now, an interesting side note with Medusa. She had Pegasus was an offspring, that fleet time, that opportune time, right? I would say. And also Chrysaor. Chrysaor was an aura, right? That in the early churches, they made icons, sometimes just around the head, but often, especially the Virgin, right, around the entire body, this aura. That's Chrysaor. That's Medusa. I mean, there are so many places that I could go with the Medusan.
All right, the final slide, and a big thank you for this presentation today, and for helping us enter
Well, I hope
this
I've helped.
wonderful area. So here comes the final slide.
See, that's racial. That's a racial image right there, or
Which one?
perhaps maybe the first racist, because Africa was known as the land of snakes.
Okay, so that's a racial image. Sorry, I didn't. I was just looking for
Yeah,
Medusa
yeah.
laughing.
So
Apologies.
Medusa, and the Medusans were originally from the Libyan area, from Africa, and had gone up through Greece and
Oh,
Italy.
oh wow.
And then they fought with the Mycenaeans who were coming down from the north.
Wow. Well, I wish I would have found a different image now.
No, I think this is perfect, David, because it's the palimpsest. It's what they had to do to make her the Gorgon,
Gotcha.
the monster, the chimera.
All right. Well, let me go to the last image, and you can decide what this image is. I have my own theory, but I'll read the small print. We begin to see the outlines of a structuralism that has moving centers, a post-colonialism that is entangled with power, but can change and transition dynamically, giving an out or thirding to dualisms in social and cultural constructs of both culture and nature. Second point, the Chora is represented as a third kind. The Chora is the third beginning again, precedes the other beginnings, and is inserted into the dialogue almost exactly at the center of the text. Third point, a gentle separability for Barad is exteriority within quote number 23, and is therefore within a very different thirding of material discourse. And I guess I put that up there just to in closing, if you could sort of tell us a little bit about some of the intricacies you see with Barad and yourself.
Yeah, I think her concept of the and I can't read it right now, but that thirding of the enfolding, right, is once you wrap your head around what she's actually writing about, so many things become clear. And so that's, I mean, that's my way of just doing her honor, because for me, that helped me to understand the unfolding of tones.
Okay. Well, let's give you a big hand, Gerri.
Well, I hope I
Wonderful.
didn't.
Get off mute and say hooray, everybody. If you come off your mute and say something nice. Anyway, I really appreciate your work, and with your
I've
permission,
got to get my
I'll
head
make
back
this a
into
video.
it.
I'll make this a video.
Yeah, no, you were very clear. Yeah, and it's new to a lot of us. So bravo for getting us through it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Betty. I mean, I'm not sure how because it's been a while. I mean, I wrote this a decade ago, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So it's been a while since I've had my head into it. You know, I've just sort of gone on and lived my harmonic life.
You know, one way, if you ever get this opportunity, one way that work we've done in the past can live on is if you meet someone who's looking for a subject and who shows a little interest in some of the same things as you, and you can be the building, what do we call that? I know the word in French, the stepping stone the stepping stone to their exploration, and your work can form the basis of it. The problem being that you've got to meet enough students to find the one for whom you can be that inspirational guide, you know.
Right.
Let's all thank Gerri McCulloh for a brilliant presentation, and thank you for allowing me to put together some slides and have the conversation at ENthinkment Circle. We meet every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Go to davidboji.com or go to enthinkment.com and you can find out all about it. Have a wonderful day.